Hi everybody, Jim Ostrowski back with the inimitable Liberty Moving podcast. Look me up on Grok and see how Grok describes the Liberty Moving podcast. It's pretty funny. Yeah, Grok knows I exist. Apparently nobody else does. So let's talk about the election. Well, I'm not going to talk about the election. But you know what? I talked about the election a year before it happened. And it's called a podcast called America's Turning Blue. So forget the election, just watch my podcast. I just posted it on Facebook. It's on YouTube. And TikTok doesn't take links, so I don't post stuff there, the podcast there. Very annoying, but whatever. It's a private company. No, it's a government company. Whatever. It doesn't matter. I don't control TikTok, so they control me. So, just as far as the what the podcast says, it's 27 minutes. It's one of the longer ones. I hope to be not too long today, actually. I'm trying to keep the podcast a little shorter. Not that there's anything wrong with the 25 minutes, but I figure if I get 15, I'll get maybe a few more listeners. And it forces me to be more terse. It's one of those SAT words. You got to learn that word for the SAT. So basically in the podcast they say, look, I prove that America is turning blue, as a matter of fact. 2, I explain why it's turning blue, which is really important. 3, I explain why it's bad. I mean, I don't spend much time on that because it's obviously bad. And 4, most importantly, and the difference between me and like everybody else, pretty much everybody else, I actually have solutions. You can, well, I'm not going to belabor that point. I actually have solutions. Well, what do you mean? Like general solutions or like call your congressman? No, like specific solutions that actually work, and you don't have to call your congressman. You can just do it. So check that one out. I noticed that Mondami is touting universal daycare, which would be a social catastrophe. We not only don't need that, we've got to get rid of what we got now. I'm not telling anybody what to do, but daycare is a disaster for kids. Kids should be raised by their parents. We're already kidnapping them at age 5 or 6, and now like you're kidnapping them from age 1 to 5. It's just disgusting. Fuck that. Daycare sucks. I don't care what anybody says. The great thing about not having a boss and not having any donors is I can say whatever the hell I want, and I do. And I hope people appreciate the authenticity of the podcast. That's the one thing I unequivocally have over almost everybody else. So, what are we going to talk about today? I did a post talk about something much more abstract, but not really, because it is in today's headlines. So, the other day, there was some sort of a slaughter in Sudan. Like 2,000 people died, and I don't know all the gory details, but I just did a post, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. I think this is an important point. And again, one of the things you get out of the Liberty, I got some cheat notes today, which I rarely have. One of the things you get out of the Liberty Moving podcast is content that's not available anywhere else. You don't hear this discussed anywhere else. In fact, if you're in academia, it's not discussed in academia. The government doesn't talk about it. Politicians don't talk about it. Other podcasters rarely talk about it. A couple libertarians, I'm sure, have talked about this over the years. But so what's the point? The point is that this violence in the Sudan, and I think Trump said something about invading Nigeria, which is a stupid idea. I mean, there's this type of violence happens constantly, and everybody just like says, "Oh, that's bad." we shouldn't have that. And nobody figures out why it happens. Well, I figured out why it happens, because and the reason is, I'll tell you right off the bat. Ideologies are what did I call ideologies the other day? I had an apt phrase for them. Ideologies are sort of mental disabilities. So they're self-imposed mental disabilities. They prevent, if you're an ideologue, in that sense, you're sort of brainwashing your mind not to see stuff. Well, what do you mean? Well, if you have an ideology that's emotionally based, it's a form of therapy, and so you filter out. I guess it's called, confirmation bias is the big buzzword. You filter out anything that contradicts the ideology. So there's these. This is a major theme of my work. So you have these ideologies out there. There's progressivism, there's leftism, there's one of the more obscure ideologies is called archism, and you may not have heard of that term because I coined that term. I recoined the term. Long story. Explained in the final book. So I don't have any of these ideologies. I am a libertarian, but I don't think libertarianism is a form of therapy. In fact, all libertarianism says is, hey, life's tough, and, people should get out of your way, and you got to get up in the morning and go to work and solve your own problems. It's not really, wow, that's great. It's not really a therapeutic ideology. And if you look at I don't want to belabor the origins of libertarianism, because that's going to go a little far afield. But so I don't have these blinders. So when I see conflict in the Ukraine, or not Ukraine, Sudan. I don't know why I said Ukraine. Actually, Ukraine's the same thing, but I don't want to talk about Ukraine. I want to talk about Sudan, Nigeria. These types of conflicts where violence breaks out is extremely common. And this whole notion that the United States is an unusually violent country is just a big lie. And if you want to know the details of that, get my latest book. It's on Amazon. It's published last year. No book this year. Really a tragedy. Hope to solve that issue next year. Crank out some more books. But it's called Exposing the Two Big Lies of the Gun Control Movement. So this type of violence is very common, but nobody ever explains why. So I'm going to explain why, and I'm not going to belabor the point about halfway through my bike path walk. So the reason is it's the state system. It's which I call archism. Archism is the belief that the world should be carved up into states, or some archists believe there should be one big world state. Now, you may say, well, gee, that makes sense to me. I get it. 99% of people believe that. But that's kind of irrelevant to my point. We're trying to figure out, why is there all this violence? And that's what I'm figuring out. So when you have the world carved up into states, the problem is that archism is really an emotional ideology. It's not a rational ideology. I know most people think, no, that's not true. Thomas Hobbes figured it all out and all this bullshit. So I'm gonna deal with all that in my final book. My contention is that it's irrational. So how do I put this? If the world's going to be divided up into states, you have boundaries. Okay, so how do we set the boundaries? And my contention is that since the theory of archism is not correct, archism has no theory of boundaries. And so boundaries basically, regardless of what you think the purpose of government is, or Thomas Hobbes or John Locke or any of this bullshit, the reality is boundaries were really created mostly by accident, and usually the result of there was a war, and some guys beat the other guys in the war and grabbed their territory, And then sometimes there was a peace treaty and the boundaries were adjusted to some extent. But the bottom line is we live in a world where boundaries were created by sort of violent chaos. We talk about how bad anarchy is. Well, the way borders were created were pretty anarchic and pretty violent, pretty chaotic, and not particularly rational. So, what's the problem? So you have these boundaries, and then because the boundaries make no sense and don't reflect the facts on the ground, you have different groups, tribes, religious groups, ethnic groups, racial groups. Sometimes you have an ideological breakdown, but that's often correlates with tribalism. Eyes are watery today. I'm not sure why. Rarely it doesn't happen. So, and then what? So, you've got Sudan. I don't know the breakdown in the Sudan. I guess it's like half Christian, half Islam. And they don't like each other. And so, well, they both try to control the government because whoever controls the government gets to screw the other side. I hope I don't have to persuade people that this is true. I'm just describing all of history here without the ideological blinders of PhDs in history. The tribes don't like each other, and they fight for control of the government, and one group gets control of the government, puts the screws on the other group, and if the other group is strong enough to fight, they will start a civil war. They'll have their guerrilla groups. I mean, I'm just describing the headlines. There's nothing new about this. This has basically happened, however you think whenever you think the state system originated. Some people say it was 1648. I think it's earlier than that. But this phenomenon of tribes, groups, fighting each other for control of the state has been going on for at least hundreds of years. I think it's probably more like thousands of years, but ancient history is not exactly my strong suit. And everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. I'm pretty strong on American history, okay on European history, and then ancient history, not so great, not so great. I shouldn't have slept through world history class when I was a freshman at St. Joe's. So the bottom line is that this violence is what's the problem? I don't think I identified the problem. So the problem is these groups fight each other. So if you had boundaries, let's say you had Islamic Martians all living in one imaginary state. Well, there might be some conflict in that between the Martians and that state, but they wouldn't be fighting over being a Martian, and they wouldn't be fighting over Islam, because they're all in the same category. So again, that's the problem. And the further problem is, so granted, Jim, let's assume you're correct. These borders are arbitrary. There's a further problem, which is there's no way to change the borders peacefully. Now there is actually, and it's been recommended. I know Ludwig von Mises talked about it. I'm not saying he was the first person, but it was a long time ago. So this idea has been out there. And then Rothbard has endorsed it, and I endorse it, and I think it's just a good idea. That if you're going to have a world of states, and we do right now, I'm not a fool, I see it, I'm not blind, I'm not stupid. In a world of states, where because archaism is an irrational, emotion-based ideology, archaism has no particular theory of borders that makes any sense. The only way to determine this would be by a local plebiscite. So wherever the boundary conflict is, wherever there's people who can't get along with the other group, and this type of problem was a problem that caused World War I. It was part of the cause of World War II. This is a major historical problem that frankly has an easy solution that people don't want to apply. So you would just have a plebiscite in that area. Let's say Alsace-Lorraine, which shifted between the Germans and the French frequently in history. It's currently French. Let's say there's an issue there that Alsace-Lorraine people think they're being mistreated by the French. So this easy solution, have a plebiscite. The people in that region, that territory, province, whatever it is, would vote on whether to, it's getting a little windy here, sorry. Hopefully this will subside when I turn the corner. They would vote on whether to continue to be part of France. One of the options would be, if they wanted to, this is hypothetical, I'm just giving an example. You could vote to be part of Germany, or you could vote to be an independent country. Problem solved. Now, if you say, well, the northern part of Alsace-Lorraine wants to do this, and the southern part wants to do that. Well, we have modern voting technology, right? Why don't we put this thing to use? And you could have basically that portion of Alsace-Lorraine that wants to do X can do X, as long as it's contiguous, because you don't want these like little islands of sovereignty, because history shows that doesn't work out too well. Again, I'm assuming a world of states. If there's not a world of states, that wouldn't be a problem. But you'd want to be contiguous, and then there's always going to be people. I didn't realize I was going to get into this detail about the solution to the border problem, because people on Facebook said, we have to have borders. Well, I'm not saying that in a world of states we don't have to have borders. So I am actually proposing, as I always do, a practical solution to the problem, as opposed to most commentators, politicians, governments, professors. They talk about the problem and they never solve the problem. So you're always going to have a few stragglers who kind of, lost the election and now they're living in a country that they prefer not to live in. That stuff's easy to fix. Just have sort of a house trading deal. You trade your house with maybe some compensation if your house is like twice the size of somebody else's house. And then you move to the other country where the side that you favored voting won the election. So there is a solution to this arbitrary border problem, but anarchists themselves don't have a solution, and they subliminally, it's a little windy today, they subliminally understand that borders are arbitrary bullshit. Existing borders are arbitrary bullshit. And so anytime you talk about changing borders, like 1861 the United States, everybody gets really nervous. So, no, you got to save the Union, and making up all sorts of fake history about, the American people preceded the states and all this Lincoln, Daniel Webster bullshit. I've written about this extensively. So they get very nervous. It's a Freudian slip that indicates that their underlying theory of archism, which divides the world into states, doesn't make any sense. It hasn't been proven to be rationally correct. That's in my view. Other people disagree. I know my view's in the minority. I don't care. I don't think truth is dictated by a poll. So that's basically what I wanted to say. I'm coming up on the end of my walk. I usually stop at Hurdle Avenue. So anarchists have no theory of borders and cannot afford to brook criticism of existing borders, lest all borders fall like the house of cards they are. Thus there is a weird taboo. No one can ever talk about or challenge existing borders or risk being labeled a madman. So we simply remain silent year after year, decade after decade, as the pointless slaughter in the name of that never-to-be-named super ideology that controls our lives and produces an endless pile of corpses. But I did name it in my final book, and in my final book, I will destroy it. Anarchism. So, have a great day, everybody.